Good night and welcome to Petroleum 101. I am your host, Kemol King, and tonight I want us to talk about cost recovery. Specifically, we're going to be having a discussion about the billions owed to ExxonMobil. Now, just a few housekeeping information. We are live on 99.1, 99.5 FM, and we are also live on our Facebook. So if you want to, shoot us any questions or make any comments, you can comment on the Facebook Live, and I, who am monitoring the Facebook Live, I'll see them right away. So we're gonna have an educational, informative discussion right here on Kaieteur Radio. The thing about Petroleum 101 right now is that the show has been reduced to half an hour from an hour. We have been going an hour steadily for maybe a year straight. And for those of you who love the show and want to see it go much longer, I'm so sorry. But it's going to be half an hour for now. Tonight with me, we do not have guests in the normal sense of it. We have Michaela Prince and Shakima Day, who will sort of act as my moderators tonight. Tonight, Michaela and Shakima are going to put me in the hot seat as we talk about cost recovery and the billions owed to ExxonMobil. So I am going to hand you over to Michaela and Shakima, and they're going to start the rigorous line of questioning. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, Kemol, the first question I want to ask you is to explain to the Guyanese populace what are pre-contract costs.
All right, no. I'm going to sort of narrow that discussion down to ExxonMobil and the Stabroek Block. Pre-contract costs, in the case of the Stabroek Block agreement, are costs that the company that has the block would have had to fund before the initial contract was signed. So in the case of the Stabroek Block agreement, what that Exxon owes, where we have found 9 billion oil equivalent barrels, pre-contract costs would amount for all the work that ExxonMobil has done in the block before the 2016 agreement was signed. So I'm going to give you a little background on that agreement. We have a 2016 agreement, a production sharing agreement that was signed by the Alliance for Change Minister of Natural Resources, Mr. Raphael Trotman, right?
Yeah.
And this agreement was signed after we found oil. And that is a brand new agreement. However, ExxonMobil has had rights to explore the Stabroek Block since 1999. And this dates back to an agreement with the former President and Minister of Petroleum, Janet Jagan. She handed ExxonMobil a petroleum prospecting license so that they would have the rights to explore the area. Now, in that time, ExxonMobil in Guyana, we hadn't had any discovery of oil in commercial quantities. We have had discoveries of oil onshore. I'm sorry, not onshore, but inland, but not in quantities that were so much that we could deem them commercial. So ExxonMobil has been drilling and doing work in the Stabroek Block for quite a number of years. So we come to 2015. Shortly before the 2015 election, ExxonMobil made a discovery of oil that will change our lives forever. And shortly after the 2015 election, after the David Granger APNU-AFC coalition unseated the Donald Ramotar PPP administration, we found out that ExxonMobil found oil in the Stabroek Block. So whatever work ExxonMobil did prior to the 2016 agreement that Mr. Raphael Trotman signed, that is a pre-contract cost. And that would include drilling costs, principally, on whatever other expenses ExxonMobil had to incur.
So for pre-contract costs, what does Guyana owe ExxonMobil, if I understand you correctly?
All right, now. So there are two phases of pre-contract costs. There are costs from 1999 up to 2016 or 2015. I want to make sure I get it right. And there is an initial tranche of costs for an additional year. So the first set of pre-contract costs is $460 million. And that's not 460 million Guyana dollars, that's 460 million US dollars.
So before you continue, so if I understand you correctly, Guyana owes ExxonMobil 460 million US dollars.
Just to put that into perspective, and hi to all the listeners, this is Michaela. But what does 460 million US dollars mean for the economy of our not our small country and the small population that we have? What can that do to transform the country that we have?
It is a lot of money. So let me see if I can put it into perspective for you very quickly. Guyana's 2019 budget was a little over $1.4 million.
Wow.
Right?
US dollars.
Right. Yes. So 460 million US dollars would be like 1/3 of our 2019 budget.
Wow.
That is a lot of money.
And the taxpayers would have to
Foot that bill. So what happens is, if a company explores, generally, they have to foot the bill. But once they make a successful discovery, you come to that point where you say, okay, we're going to repay the company for the work it did to explore the block. So ExxonMobil made a discovery, and Raphael Trotman, in an agreement, said he would repay ExxonMobil $460 million. That figure is actually inscribed in the 2016 production sharing agreement.
Okay.
So we have agreed that we will repay ExxonMobil $460 million US dollars. The jury's out on that for some people because the government hired a firm, the former government, the APNU-FC government, hired a firm to audit the costs. So there had been quite some hullabaloo protest about whether the cost is correct, whether it is inflated. Because some people might say the oil companies, they have a habit of inflating costs. We don't know if Exxon inflated costs, but we can look at the precedent set by oil companies in other countries where they have indeed given governments costs that weren't necessarily what they spent. There are quite a few examples of that. So it is important for us to take the bills that these oil companies are giving to the country and to audit them to make sure they are what the oil companies say they are, because Guyana has to repay every cent. Very important to this discussion is the fact that the attorney at law and the accountant, Mr. Christopher Ram, he took the time to study the cost, the $460 million bill, and he said that this is overstated by some 92 million US dollars.
Wow.
And the reason he made that assessment is because he determined that some of the costs that the companies wanted to bill us for, they weren't exactly cost recoverable. So under the agreement, we have decided that these are the things that are cost recoverable and some other things are not. So what you bill us for, it has to be in sync with what we agreed to. And so I suppose Christopher Ram expects that when this audit is done, it will be $92 million less.
So in actuality, Guyana should be paying at least 368 million US, not.
You can say that. Well, what happened is that the audit was done by the firm IHS Markit. And I understand that from the head of the Guyana Revenue Authority, Mr. Godfrey Stacia, that the audit is over and the report has been sent to the oil companies. Now the oil companies have to go through this audit look at the findings of the firm that the government contracted and respond to what it is saying. We don't know what is in that report, but I suppose we'll find out when the companies have completed their assessments of the situation. And we're going to make sure that we hammer the government to make public the findings.
So you're saying that, if I get you correctly, you were saying that the their phases. So there's LISA phase 1, LISA phase 2, and then LISA phase 3, or the Payara project. So this 460 million cost is for LISA phase 1.
Okay. The $460 million is just for exploration. LISA phase 1, LISA phase 2, and Payara, they are development costs. So I'm going to explain the difference between that. Now, when a company makes a find, it decides, it studies the find, and it says, okay, this find, LISA phase 1, has, say, 300 million barrels of oil, and I want to produce what is in this find. So they're going to approach the government, and they're going to say, let me develop this. And so we come to development costs. Development costs is the money you spend to set up the infrastructure to begin to produce. And I'm going to give you an analogy for this. Let's say you want to build a house. You buy all your materials to build this house, and you set up the house. All the money that you pay for the material, the workmanship that you pay the construction workers to build the house, for them to put everything together and set it up for you, that's the development cost. That's how you can consider LISA phase 1. In LISA phase 1, they have to purchase the FPSO. The FPSO is the floating vessel. Floating production, storage and offloading vessel. And that's the vessel that's going to be pulling up the oil from the discovery area. And then there are some other things that they had to spend their money on. So in the case of LISA phase 1, which was ExxonMobil's initial discovery, the cost, the development cost, is $3.5 billion US dollars.
Wow.
And yeah, that's a lot of money. That
is
leagues
a lot.
more than the $460 million. That is more than twice the size of Guyana's 2020 budget.
Wow. Just
To get you an understanding of how humongous the revenues is that's flowing through this industry. So what's happening with LISA phase 1 is initially when ExxonMobil planned to produce at LISA phase 1, what it did was it billed us $4.4 billion US dollars, right? And as time went by, it found that the economics of this project were a little more favorable than they initially thought. And they revised the price down to $3.7 billion US dollars.
But that's still a lot of money.
It is still a lot of money, but that's the nature of the oil industry. Then at one point they decided, no, it's not going to be 3.7 billion, it's going to be 3.5 billion. So when you look at it from the initial cost that they foisted on us and the final cost, that's 900 million US dollars.
Nice.
That is so much money. And so we had people like the vice president who, in opposition leader, had said, in the opposition position, he had said, the fact that ExxonMobil can revise its cost down $900 million, you have to really scrutinize what they're giving to us. It's kind of worrying that you can give me a bill that was overstated by $900 million. Yeah?
Just to take you back on a point you made earlier, Kemol, you stated that $90 million was, well, according to Mr. Ram, that $90 million was with the $460 million was not supposed to be recovered. That's correct, right?
Okay, yes, that was Ram's assessment.
Assessment. On his assessment, did he give an idea of what the
96
well
million?
then well what the 90 million,
Excess million?
yeah, those that excess money, what the
It was for?
yeah, what it was for, what you can't recover for.
No, I don't believe that he did specify. I mean, as a journalist, I'm not an analyst. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna go ask him. Let's look through what these are. I'm not trained for that sort of stuff.
That's understandable.
But what he said is that the $92 million, that's a conservative estimate for what's overstated. He was going from the lower limit from what he said was overstated. It could be overstated by much, much more than that.
So, but we're only talking about Liza Phase 1. What about Liza Phase 2?
No. We're not even talking about Liza Phase 1 when we talk about 460 million.
Jesus.
We're talking about exploration. So Liza Phase 1, hold on. We ain't reached Liza Phase 1 yet.
So this is like, we didn't reach Liza Phase 1, but yet we already owe these people at least 460 million.
Yes. So after the $460 million, there is an initial tranche of costs that we have to pay, right? Melinda Janke, an international lawyer, she had done a calculation of what those initial costs would be. And she calculated that it would be some 500 million extra dollars. And we haven't reached the development costs yet, right? So that would amount to about, say, $960 million. And we haven't reached ExxonMobil's development. $960 million, approximately, that we have to repay to ExxonMobil and its Stabroek Block partners, Hess Corporation, and Sinop Nexen, right? So how that money is going to be repaid is that when the oil is sold, we take the money out that we have to repay them and we hand it to them. So how the fiscal system works is that when you sell the oil, the money that comes back, you allow the oil companies to recover their investment up to 75% of what the oil is sold for. And then the rest you can split up, right? So what happens is in the initial, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, how much ever years it will take for the oil companies to recover their investment, they will be taking as high as 75% of the cost. And so the remaining, I say 25% will be left for us to split up 50-50. This is where we come to profit sharing.
So can you explain a bit about profit sharing? I was getting to that.
Okay, so what happens is, from the sale of the oil, once the oil companies recover what they've invested, we split what is left between the government and the oil companies 50-50. So the government gets 50% and the oil companies get 50%, and they split that up between themselves. So it may seem like a lot, you get 50%, I get 50%, but it's really not when you look at the bigger picture. If an oil company is recovering 75% of what it invested, then the 50-50 is not 50-50 of the whole thing. It's 50-50 of the little quarter that's left. And so it's no longer 50-50, it's 12.5% for Guyana, and then the 2% royalty, which is a little short of 15%. That's how much of our wealth we get back.
So we necessarily don't get anything. If I understand you correctly, we don't get anything, because if we have to pay them back this amount of money and then we have to split that little money that's left, what do we get? How can that add to Guyana's development?
We're still on the tip of the iceberg,
Wow.
Shakima. So let's get to the development cost. Now, there are 3 projects that have been approved by the government. Liza Phase 1 and Liza Phase 2 have been approved by the APNUFC government, which was just ousted in the recent election. And then the PPP government approved Payara.
Which is like the Phase 3.
You can call it that, but it's
It's
Payara.
Payara. Okay.
So I told you already that Liza Phase 1 cost $3.5 billion. That was the final estimate. Liza Phase 2 now, it's different. Liza Phase 1 was built to produce 120,000 barrels per day. But then the contractors looked at Liza Phase 2 and they decided, we want to take a little more. So Liza Phase 2, it's a sort of like a bigger reserve. You have to take out some 500 million barrels of oil, which is hundreds million more what is in Liza Phase 1. So they're making the FPSO, which is currently in Singapore under construction, to produce 220,000 barrels of oil per day. And when you consider the specifications of that project, you'll definitely have a higher cost than Liza Phase 1. So Liza Phase 1 cost $3.5 billion US dollars. Liza Phase 2, they're saying, cost $6 billion US dollars. That is 4 times Guyana's 2020 budget.
Wow.
Right? And Guyana has to repay all of that once they start producing.
So what about Liza Phase 3 or Payara?
You keep calling it Liza Phase 3.
Sorry.
It's
Payara. So what about Payara?
Okay. Now, Payara, I think this was recently one of the more contentious projects because the PPP government or the PPP in opposition, they had been so critical of the coalition government, and they said, you're making so many wrong decisions. We were not ready for oil, but yet you approved production. You didn't update the legislation, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, but yet you approved it. So now the PPP government comes in and we think, oh, you've been critical of the coalition
So you might do something right.
for not doing what's right. So I suppose as soon as you come in, you're going to build our capacity. But you know what happened? When the PPP came in, they didn't update the legislation first. They hired a reviewer, a Canadian advisor, Miss Alison Redford, who has a very controversial history, to head a team to revise the work that the AP and UAFC had been doing on the project. Now, the AP and UAFC government, they had hired a firm called Bayphase to review ExxonMobil's plan for the Payara project. So the government has to approve every plan that the oil companies make to develop a field. Now, the thing about Bayphase is that Bayphase had ExxonMobil as a client. It did work for ExxonMobil. So the thing you'd ask yourself is, why would you hire a company who has ExxonMobil as a client to review ExxonMobil's work?
Exactly.
If I'm getting money from ExxonMobil, do you think I'd want to say anything bad about ExxonMobil?
Of course not. That's a clear conflict of interest.
Right. So we had this company that has ExxonMobil as a client reviewing ExxonMobil's project. And the PPP government came then and they decided, I'm going to hire Miss Redford to review this project. And so Miss Redford comes in now and she has her own issues. Miss Redford was actually the premier of a Canadian province. So let me try to give you what would be the equivalent in the Guyana situation. Let's say every region has its own leader aside from the president. That's what happened in Canada. Every region of the country has its own premier. So Alison Redford, she was the premier of Canada, Canada's province, Alberta. And she had to demit office because she was caught up in a scandal over her mishandling of public funds.
Wow.
She was accused of mishandling public funds for personal purposes and other purposes. And so when Kaieteur News found out about this, because we do our due diligence on everyone that they hire,
Yes, we do.
we found it out and we reported on it. And what happened is the government did nothing about it. I guess they decided that they were comfortable with Miss Redford. So Miss Redford went ahead and she did her review of Bayphase's review, and they produced some findings, and the government eventually approved the project.
Wow.
I'm not going to labor on Miss Redford too long because we're talking about costs. The cost of the Payar project, we would have assumed that the cost would be somewhere close to the cost of the Liza 2 project because they're sort of similar. So the Liza 2 project and the Payara project, they both have between 600 million barrels of oil, and the FPSOs are being engineered to produce 220,000 barrels per day. But lo and behold, when the Payara project was approved, we discovered that the cost was 50% more. While Liza 2 is estimated to cost $6 billion US dollars, Payara is estimated to cost $9 billion US dollars.
Wow.
That's crazy.
That is very crazy. So what do they like account for the excess costs? Like did they offer an explanation of why it's so high?
So we tried to sort this out, and I'm sure there are many explanations that the oil companies, ExxonMobil, Hess, and CNOOC would give. One of the reasons they had given in Hess's recent earnings call about the increase is that there are more wells in the Payara project, and so they had to install more pipelines through which the fluids would flow. Yeah, and sure, that would cost a lot of money.
But so much though?
Well, there are more contingencies that they spoke about in their earnings call. I mean, Kemol King, am not an oil man, so I don't know what the contingencies are, but I guess somewhere down the line, the government will have to audit those costs. Here's the problem though. We have been auditing $460 million in costs since late last year. I think it's been almost a year now since we've been auditing $460 million in costs. And we just finished the audit. And we have, with those 3 development projects, about, I don't know, $19 billion in cost to audit.
Wow.
If we take so long to audit less than $500 million in costs, how long are we going to take to do the rest? How many years are we going to have to deal with these billions in costs, which there's a chance they could be overstated? How long?
Does do the local authorities have the capacity to audit those costs? And if not, have we sought international help to guide us in ensuring that the numbers are correct?
And not just audit, but monitor those costs to make sure that the ExxonMobil is billing us for what they said they do.
Well, the best practice in the industry is once you don't have the expertise, what you do is you hire people to come in. But you don't just hire people to come in. You make sure that you create an environment where locals are learning to audit the costs too. So while you have these international experts who are versed in the industry, who are auditing the costs, you have your local unit within the GRE and whatnot who are actively learning and following this audit process. So at some point, Guyanese can take over by themselves.
And that goes along the lines of local content.
I suppose you can call it that, but local content is a different story. Local content is when we expect that oil companies, in their planning and their spending of money to develop their projects, that they hire Guyanese as much as they could, use Guyanese expertise, use Guyanese products. That's local content.
So in conclusion, basically, Guyana is being handed a bunch of bills that we have to repay. The taxpayers of Guyana have to repay.
And I'm only talking about the Stabroek Block. The Stabroek Block is one block.
And we haven't even touched the other blocks as yet.
I suppose they had made discoveries in 2 other blocks. And we're sure to make discoveries in other blocks. In every single block that they make discoveries and they decide we're going to produce, they're going to bill Guyana for the work that they did in those blocks. Now, Guyana can take the money, the bills, and we can say we're going to repay it just like that. Or we can say that we're going to audit it. But we come to that problem again. We're auditing at a snail's pace.
Yikes.
And according to experts in the industry, with the state of the contract that we have with ExxonMobil and its partners in the Stabroek Block, Guyana will be repaying these oil companies for years upon years before we can see the inflow from the sale of our oil go much higher.
That it's a good point you raised, because I was listening to a program with one of our colleagues, Kiana Wilberg, last week, I believe, with two esteemed persons in the industry, Mr. Tom Sanzilla and Miss Melinda Janke, and he indicated during that that interview
Program, yeah.
that Norway, which is known for developing the oil resource, is slowly moving away from producing it because they have realized that in 40, 50 years from now, it's not going to be lucrative. Considering that we are now a country that is new into the oil industry, where does that put us now when we have to repay all of these bills?
When do we see the fruits of
When
our
do
labor?
we see the
Yeah.
fruits of the labor,
Exactly.
and how do you put that into context with a world that is changing and moving into different energy sources like solar and wind and water?
That's right. So there's the argument out there that we have a short window to maximize on the revenue inflows that's coming from the oil industry, because the world's moving away and at some point they're going to completely do away with oil. That tells us at this point that what we need to do more than ever is to build our capacity, because we know that the oil industry has a lot of money running through it. And we know that because of a lot of money running through it, there is such a significant risk for corruption. There is such a significant risk that the oil companies know that we don't have the capacity to check them. So there's a risk for them to take advantage of the government. So what the government, I suppose, would wisely do, is to build its capacity to check the companies. But what we've seen is that successive administrations, they've placed as priority just getting the projects out so that they can get some money in. But how much money are you really getting in?
Yeah.
Are you getting in money that reflects your dignity, that reflects the dignity of what we've discovered out there, of what we have? Those are the questions that need to be answered. So I think we've spoken a little over time.
Sorry about that.
And once again, I'm sorry for the people who come on here to see Petroleum 101 for an hour. I am so sorry, but we have been reduced to half an hour for a few weeks now. And I hope you join us next week again for another 30 minutes of Petroleum 101.
But it was a very informative program where you learned about pre-contract costs and all the money that Guyana would have to repay to ExxonMobil.
And I hope you tune in so we can talk about something else interesting. And I hope that I am explaining it in a way that's simple enough for you, the viewers and the listeners, to understand.
And even if you don't understand, you can always call us or text us on 622 sorry, or you can message us on our Facebook page or comment on our Facebook Live.
All right, now. So I'm Kemol King.
I'm Michaela Prince.
And I'm Shakima Day.
And you have been listening to Petroleum 101. Good night.
Have a great
and enjoy.
evening.
Yeah.
Take care.